Dag, een data- en tech-gedreven toekomst van Flex. Dat is het thema van dit onderwerp en ik kan me eigenlijk geen spannendere en betere titel bedenken dan de laatste webinar van deze HR Tech en Flex dag in de webinarweek. Want dat gaan we bespreken zo meteen. En dat doe ik natuurlijk niet, maar we hebben een mooie gast hier zo meteen. Dat is Kevin Akeroyd, de CEO van Pro Unlimited. En Pro Unlimited is misschien nog niet zo'n hele bekende naam voor jullie. Maar dat is het bedrijf waar de Brainnet onderdeel van uitmaakt ondertussen. Na de acquisitie of de opname eigenlijk van Brainnet in de Pro Unlimited familie eerder dit jaar. Dus vandaar dat wij zo meteen even overschakelen. Zowel naar San Francisco als naar het Engels om Kevin het woord te geven. Nou, leuk dat jullie er in ieder geval waren. En laat me nog even noemen dat dit natuurlijk onderdeel is van de brede webinarweek. Waar we vandaag, of dit het laatste webinar is, maar we morgen natuurlijk weer verder gaan. Heel actueel ook om het over de schaarste op de arbeidsmarkt te hebben en hoe je daar met recruitment een oplossing voor kan geven. Zijn we vrijdag weer terug en dan gaan we het over Total Talent Acquisition en Total Talent Management hebben. En wat nou precies het verschil tussen die twee begrippen is, komt denk ik in die webinars ook uitvoerig aan bod. Nou, genoeg daarover en genoeg mij in beeld. We gaan snel overschakelen naar Kevin. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me today.
Yeah, thank you for having you in the show here. It is an inconvenient time for you. It's 5:30 in San Francisco, very early in the morning. But
I haven't even had my first cup of coffee yet, but that's okay. I'm ready to go.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Okay. You will give a presentation about maybe 15-20 minutes. All the viewers, please ask your questions during the webinar that we can discuss after the presentation. But before the presentation starts, Kevin, I ask it everybody that comes here at the webinar week. We have 1.5 year COVID, which completely changed the way we work. Maybe we are getting back to normal. But what are your thoughts on this strange period where you have acquired Brainnet? But you told me you have never been into Holland to even meet the owners in live from Brainnet. So it must be a strange period.
It is different for me. I have been somebody that has been in technology companies that have been headquartered in the United States for better on 20 years that have had European presence and large European customer bases and European employee bases. And I'm used to going to Europe every month, to see partners or customers or acquisitions or go to events. So for me to be almost 2 years in and to want to have even taken a job, because I've been with Pro and in the industry for about 15 months now, to take a job 100% digitally, right? No travel or no meeting, to go through the process of acquiring companies like Brainnet and Cheba and I did this 50 times, but to acquire a company, never having been over there and met the people or been in the place, and now to be running the business and still not having been. So it has been a different adjustment time, but the good news is it's worked. And as you and I shared, it looks like things are lessening a little bit. So I'm looking forward to getting back over there, and I'm very much looking forward to getting over to the Netherlands and finally meeting almost 300 employees that we have over there, Brainnet family. So fingers crossed, things behave this weekend and I can finally get over there.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, maybe we will meet also then.
I hope so.
That would be nice. Okay. Maybe you can start the presentation, and viewers, once again, if you have any questions for Kevin, don't hesitate to ask them and put them in the chat, and I will bring them on after your presentation, Kevin.
Yeah, would be happy to. And if we can go ahead and advance the slides. This is, I prepared a discussion today on the global trends in contingent workforce management. And just via definition for the audience, this might be relatively self-explanatory, but how we define contingent is broadly if it's not a full-time employee at the company's employment, then we call that contingent. So that could be freelancers, that could be project work, it could be temporary workers, it could be gig workers. If it's not full-time employee, we call it contingent, and that's what I'm going to address today. So if we can go to the next slide. It certainly has been, as we just talked about, it's been a very interesting last couple of years. The shift from full-time employees to non-full-time employees or contingent certainly did not get created by the pandemic or by COVID. That shift was rapidly happening already. Did the last year and a half of the pandemic accelerate it? Absolutely yes, though. It has accelerated it, and it has made some fundamental changes, which I'm going to talk about. But we've got a lot of market dynamics going on. The employers are recognizing it from a financial stability, agility, nimbleness, et cetera, that contingent is going to be a much larger part of strategic workforce planning going forward. The employers in Europe, but literally globally, more and more employees or the workers are expecting the ability to work from flexible locations, remote, anywhere in the world. There's going to be a big shift in full-time employees. Well, based on the last 2 years, over here in California, we call it the Great Resignation. But globally, we're seeing a lot of people attrit. There will be 13 million nurses around the world will retire. Over 30,000 white-collar tech workers, 30 million white-collar tech workers will quit, this year in developed North American and EMEA regions. So we've got a huge dynamic going on in the population, and it's becoming more and more expensive. There's competitive salary markets going on in all the major markets. So a lot of business dynamics and a lot of talent dynamics. And I'm going to go through some of what we see as a large European and as a large global contingent workforce management provider, some of the trends that we think are the most important that'll be interesting for you, the audience, to go to deep dive a little bit on today. So if we can go to the next slide. I will start with just the overall sizing of contingent. Contingent has already reached 43% of the workforce. It's a very large part of the overall employment globally. Almost everyone you read, right, whether it's governmental research, industry associations, the large consulting and researching firms, virtually everyone agrees that next year we will probably see the world go to over 50% of the workforce will in fact be contingent and not full-time. The growth rates for contingent, while we have not seen full-time employment in most European markets, certainly in the American markets and globally, full-time employment has not snapped back anywhere near this fast. But the global rate of contingent workers is already 25% higher than pre-COVID levels as of Q2 of this year. So full-time employment is not come back to pre-COVID levels. Contingent growth rate is much higher than pre-COVID levels. More and more talent pools, the workers themselves are only interested in contingent. So what we call over here digital natives, the younger, Gen Z, tech-focused folks, there's a whole crop of millions of workers that really want the flexibility, want the rapid skilling, want the diversity, and they will only take jobs. They'll take a 6 or 9 month assignment, then they'll go do something else. They'll go skiing or traveling or some side business, and then they'll come back and do another job. You've got the second parents. They're staying at home. They're educated. They're skilled. They have white collar resumes, but they need to stay home while the other parent, works. That's a huge talent pool. The retirees, right, the folks that are no longer working in FTEs, that are older but are incredibly skilled, want to actually stay involved, and want to do so on a contingent or a non-FTE base. So huge chunks of the skilled talent pool in Europe and globally are only working contingent, and we as employers are certainly going to have to recognize that and realize that's a huge percentage of the talent pool that we're going to need to work with. And this is certainly a phenomenon that is hitting everything, the whole organization chart, tech, IT, finance, operations, marketing, HR, legal. It's the whole org chart. And it's the white collar specialty skills. It's not just the shift worker. It's not just the light industrial worker. It's not just the gig worker. It's the entire talent pool. So contingent is becoming will soon become the largest part of the overall global talent pool. If we go to the next slide, one of the things that's very interesting is that remote and global talent acquisition are now required to compete. The the workforce continues to demand more and more, and again, this varies country by country in each region. So there's no way to paint a global number here, or even a European specific country. But by and large, in all the advanced economies around the world, the FTE and contingent workers continue to demand more and more remote options. I need to work from home. I need to only be in the office 3 days a week, but I need to be at home the other 2 weeks, et cetera. So the talent pool continues to demand remote options. So far, the productivity and success over the last couple of years has been very high. So while this was a concern, as this thing kicked off so far, the success, the performance, the productivity, company results have been very high. Global demand companies, right? Whether I'm a European-based company, whether I'm an Asian-based company, whether I'm a North America-based company, more and more of the large employers literally cannot satisfy the demands within their specific country or within a region, but have to participate on a global level now. There's all kinds of legislation now that's making it harder and harder to import non-local talent. We certainly see that a lot in the United States with things like H-1B as an example, where the technology companies in America could not get enough talented engineers and quality assurance and IT people, and they were forced to actually go global to look for engineering talent. And that's happening in dozens of countries around the world. And it's becoming harder and harder. And as you see things, I'm sure the news around companies like Google, right, where class action suits around pay parity, where if a similar type of worker, say in the Benelux region or in the DACH region, is getting paid differently than the Asia Pacific region, and that's different than the United States, you're actually seeing lawsuits aimed at major employers around lack of pay parity. That's becoming an issue. And obviously worker regulation, compliance, statutories, et cetera, is becoming completely more sophisticated and more risky. So the remote and the global talent pool to fill this contingent need is becoming mandatory. The workers want it. The employers are getting good at it. It's working. Productivity is up. But the risks associated with it are going up as well, something that we as employers and, quite frankly, the whole industry and staffing need to pay close attention to. So if we can go to the next slide, another set of trends that are worth noting are that, for a long time, contingent has just been basically backfill. It's temporary staffing, it's seasonal, it's burst capacity for a job. It's no longer being viewed that way. The contingent side is a strategic part of the mid and long-term workforce optimization and future of talent strategy. We're seeing that it's going all the way up, not just to the chief human resource officer, but to the C-suite and the board level, saying if this is going to be half of our employee base, I can't compete just with full-time employees that are near my offices. I have to compete in a non-full-time, right, remote, at least regional, if not global, that's coming with an entire different set of strategic planning. And getting up the maturity curve on how to actually manage this. Most sophisticated employers, regardless of whether they're European, Asian, or North American, are here on the maturity curve with full-time employment. They're here on contingent workforce management. They're nowhere near as sophisticated and mature. So getting up that maturity curve to figure out how to strategically manage what is a strategic part of the workforce planning is becoming mission critical. So we're calling it portfolio management, but people are viewing contingent as a strategic part of the portfolio of capital rather than just backfilling or bursting or project work. So we can go to the next slide. Next trend that's actually worth mentioning. I'll wait for a second while the slide advances. It's a big financial impact. I call it driving earnings per share. The spend on contingent workforce now is over $5 trillion globally. It's climbing. It is growing double digits. From everything we can tell with all our industry analysis, this is over $1.5 trillion U.S. dollars. Forgive me for using U.S. dollars, but over $1.5 trillion in U.S. In Europe specifically on contingent workforce. So you're seeing also, because that is such a large part of the expense of the P&L on a company, and it is very widely acknowledged that there is double-digit waste. There's 10, 15, 20, 25% waste. So a large employer could have $5 billion US in contingent workforce spend. There's 20% waste in there. That's $1 billion US that I could take out of my cost structure, and that will literally drive my earnings per share. It will drive my enterprise value. It will drive my stock price. So you're seeing the procurement office, the chief procurement officer, you're seeing the chief financial officer come hand in hand up with HR to co-own this issue, given the dollars involved. And it's about quality, cost, and speed. So it's always been about employee quality. It's always been around the speed, right, with which I need to go fill the valuable talent. And now there's very much a cost all the way up to the CFO being so. And there's a lot of change management required in most corporations to actually realize the opportunity. A large European employer could have hundreds of, if not thousands, of individual hiring managers hiring at whatever rates they want to, right, with whatever they do. The notion of global rate cards, global compliance around what I pay for this type of work in this country, right, at these rates for this experience set, that really isn't mature. It hasn't been standardized, but it is becoming very mature, and people are applying their strategic sourcing and procurement disciplines everywhere else in the corporation over here into contingent workforce as well. So we go to the next slide. Direct sourcing is the term that we use. And basically what I mean by that is, for several decades, the contingent workforce supply chain, for lack of a better word, has come primarily through third parties, staffing companies like Randstad or Kelly or Allegis or Adecco or Manpower, professional services firms like Cognizant or Infosys or Capgemini or Accenture, Deloitte. And that has come with the third-party staffing agency or consulting firm owning the relationship with the talent, right, with the individual worker. And it's coming with 20 to 50% markups. The brands, if I'm a large brand anywhere in the world, I want to use the power of my brand, and I want to go start recruiting and hiring contingent workers directly. Myself, Apple, Nike, Diageo, Rabobank, SAP, you name it. I'm going to go acquire my contingent staff directly and not go through these staffing agencies, professional services. We estimate that a good 25% of the recs that are put out there that are needed for contingent are going to be edicted to go direct to the brand versus a staffing agency or a consultancy. That's obviously a material shift. 20 to 50% cost optimization by removing those staffing agency fees or removing those other third-party fees is going to be very material. So if I've got $1 billion, and again, I'm going to use US dollars. If I have $1 billion in US spend as a large European employer, and there's 40% waste, not waste, there's 40% going to the staffing agency layer, I'm going to free up that 400 million US, and I'm going to take some of it to invest in other areas. I'm going to take some of it to the bottom line, but I'm going to use a non-trivial part of that to actually go pay the workers or the top talent a lot more. So you're going to see this huge shift from money being spent by the employers to the staffing agencies to money being spent by the employers paying the workers much more money, higher wage rates, while saving themselves money in the time by this direct sourcing. It's going to require brands to get as good as recruiting contingent, having the right kind of employer branding, the right contingent worker candidate engagement, worker experience. They're going to have to emulate the branding and the employee experience they have on the full-time side. They need to emulate the candidate or the worker contingent workforce experience and the contingent branding. But they're going to do that increasingly to take advantage of the direct sourcing opportunity. And again, this is going to be yet another major reskilling and talent portfolio management competency inside the hiring organization, because the hiring organization, less employers, are not used to doing that. And obviously, the technology that we use for full-time employee applicant tracking systems or data or other, the HCM or FTE technologies do not apply here. So there's going to be discrete and new tech data and analytics platforms that are required to pull off this direct sourcing. But this is probably one of the most important trends and the biggest trends in all of contingent staffing. So if we can keep going. Next slide. As I mentioned, the worker experience, that very talented contingent worker who's a fantastic IT person or developer or finance, they are very particular. They're highly sought after. They've got a lot of options. And, what we call it the seller's market. Right? It's not a buyer's market anymore. The employers don't have the power. The contingent employees, the talent, have the power. And then we think that's going to sustain, ongoing. Again, this is for all roles, not just the specialty skilled. The contingent workforce experience managers on the client side are going to have to actually get very good at treating that contractor or that freelancer or that project worker with the same kind of employee experience as they've done on the FTE side. The same attributes as full-time don't necessarily create. And we're going to need to actually be very focused on how we do this with, say, the younger tech digital enablement versus those second parents versus those older workforce. So we're going to have to do worker experience and engagement the way we have done employee experience engagement for a long time. It's going to be different, and we're going to have to do it differently depending on which cohort or which generation of the contingent talent that we're after. So the worker experience and recognize that the worker has the power is going to be a new reality that most of us wake up to, and a lot of us that are large regional or global employers are already seeing. If we can go to the next slide. We also believe that we are entering a skills-based economy. It's not about the job title or the role anymore. It's literally about skills. So for 30 years, we've said, hey, I need an engineer, 3, or a sysadmin 2, or an IT specialist 4. Those titles that we see in resumes, that we see in how we actually source through portals, et cetera, that job description or that title could mean 100 things to 100 different companies. And it could mean one thing in this European country and mean something completely different in that European country. It's now about the skills. So we're going to shift away from titles, job descriptions, et cetera. We're going to shift into the actual skill sets. The skills will, in fact, drive cost up or down quite a bit. So I'm not just going to hire an engineering contractor anymore. I'm to delineate between Ruby on Rails, .NET, Java, etc., and the overall ability to apply machine-based learning and artificial intelligence so that thousands of European employers and tens of thousands of global employers can go use the machine-based learning and AI to go match the tens of millions of European or global workers. We can't do it the same way with just humans anymore. This is an area where data and the artificial intelligence applied to that data is going to become mission critical to shift into skills-based and then go make skills-based assignments to hundreds of thousands or millions of European workers every year is going to be a very pronounced shift. We go to the next slide. Diversity and inclusion. We are seeing this be very much a global issue. It's not just a United States issue. It's not just a North American issue. It's not just a European issue. We are seeing this become front and center across the world, and we're definitely seeing it in Europe. It's a must to satisfy the contingent workforce management demand. The goals now, companies are setting as aggressive goals on the contingent side for diversity as they are on the full-time employee side. We're seeing more and more chief diversity officers right at the table. They're now peers with the chief procurement or finance or HR officer with specific goals, agendas, and empowerment. The regulatory horizon around diversity itself is becoming material. And again, just like with direct sourcing is requiring its own specific tech, data, analytics, and services. Satisfying diversity and inclusion in contingent is also requiring its own discrete tech, data, analytics, and services. So I'm sure everyone in here is feeling this, but it's just getting started. We think that this is becoming from important to mainstream and mission critical. So we can go to the next slide. And we think the tech transformation, tech transformation has been We've been through it a lot on the full-time employee side. So we think we're going to see what I'm going to call in a moment point solutions to suites. Analytics intelligence and data-driven are going to become table stakes. The machine-based learning and artificial intelligence has real applications. It's not just fluff and marketing. And interoperability with the other HRIS or procurement or ERP systems is going to be critical. So we can go to the next slide. I'll just stress a little bit more about what I mean there. And this one's interesting. I like to say history repeats itself. We've gone from the employer trying to satisfy this big, sophisticated, important demand with dozens of small little companies that do a little piece of what they need. But they don't do everything. They're not global. They're not pan-European. They're not at scale. And what you see is that shifts over time. So for decades, the head of sales, worked with 10 or 15 different small providers. Now they're by one CRM platform, from Salesforce or Microsoft. It happened with the CMO and MarTech. I went from dozens of point solutions. Now I buy one marketing tech platform from an Adobe or Salesforce. It even happened in human capital management, in HR, right on the full-time employee side. I used to work with dozens of small little HCM applications. Now I work with one platform from people like Workday, or others. And the exact same thing is now happening in contingent workforce. Now the contingent is now 50% of all work. It's $5 trillion and growing. It's risky. It's compliant fraud, et cetera. We're going to watch contingent go through the exact same point solutions to platforms shift that the HR side did. We go to the next slide. This is just a kind of a bit of an articulation. You're going to see the contingent workforce management platform become a system of record. It's not going to be a little bit done in HCM and a little bit done in ERP and a little bit done in procurement and a little bit done in employee experience. The contingent workforce platform is a system of record now, and it needs to be highly interoperable with all these other SORs. So definitely going to start to see this trend hit. If we go to the next slide, you're already seeing players. Staff augmentation is one thing. Statement of work is one thing. Direct sourcing is one thing. Diversity inclusion is one thing. It's a very fragmented contingent need. And then what companies need, right? They need MSPs, but they also need SaaS applications. They also need data. They also need intelligence and analytics. They also need payroll and compliance, et cetera. So again, if I'm an enterprise that, again, regardless of where I am in the world, I'm having to work in this highly fragmented environment. But as companies roll out in advance and start building true platforms, if you can go to the next slide, that will enable you to do all of this across the whole needs of contingent and across all the capabilities. And I'll wait for the slide to advance for a sec. Here on this one. Actually, yeah, I forgot I put this one in here. This is just how fragmented this landscape is. If we can go ahead and build through this, Martina, that'd be great. I forgot that this thing built, but if you can build all the way through, it'll just show to kind of make the point just how incredibly fragmented this solution landscape is. So if you're a hirer, right, if you're an enterprise that's looking to hire, this is what you have to deal with. Boy, where do I start, right, with company, which country, which set of jobs, right, which function, et cetera. This is the fragmented point solution landscape that I'm looking at. And then if you go to the next slide, again, forgive me for that, Martina. And this is not an advertisement about Pro whatsoever. It's just companies like Pro, and there certainly will not be more just Pro, but it'll be a lot of them. The hiring enterprise is going to need a platform to whether that is pan-European or whether that is global. I'm going to shift to enabling platforms that do most of all of the requirements I have rather than deal with 10, 11, 15 point solutions, which were illustrated on the private side. So you're going to see a big shift in the actual hiring enterprise from these point solutions to the platform on the technology side. Let's go to the next slide. We'll also see companies having to commit to going up the maturity curve, as I call it. Companies are going to have to actually get their culture and their leadership engaged. This can't just come from talent mobility or HR. The whole company and the C-suite is going to have to mature. The talent mindset that contingent is as important. It needs to be managed the same way full time. Measurement, business objectives, right? KPIs, the underlying process and governance, compliance, business processes, best practices, et cetera, and the data and the analytics to tell us how we're doing. Most companies are in this stage 1, stage 2, and not only are you going to see a shift from point solutions platform, you're going to see companies that have committed to getting from stage 1 to stage 5 in full-time employment HR are going to need to commit and are committing to go from stage 1 to stage 5 on the contingent side. So that you're going to see it, as I've talked about, it's not just a technology issue, it's an organizational maturity issue. And forgive the eye chart here. We like to show a bunch of those, but the point is companies are going to need to actually go up the curve in many ways to get sophisticated here. If we go to the next slide. Tech will enable the journey. That's about it. We will see companies utilize all those tools and be able to actually very methodically look at where am I along each one of those matrices, and what do I need to deploy. So this can be a slow, measured, calculated approach where I phase things in. It doesn't have to be this big bang, go from 0 to 100. It will be staged as companies go well. So we go to the next slide. And, kind of the final is just, what do hiring enterprises need to focus on? There's going to be new skills and new knowledge and new staff on your end to manage this complex world. There's a lot of new technology and data and analytics solutions to go figure out, to learn, to get expert on, and to manage. Again, as I mentioned, there's already a complex compliance, regulation, pay parity, work council, right, et cetera, trends issue. This is going to get more and more complex. You're going to need to make that data analytics and intelligence commitment. But then the good news is the expertise is there. So we encourage all the audience to look for the expertise where it exists, because it is there. So go get it and help up the maturity and help up the learning curve to go tackle this very huge opportunity, but also very complex and challenging one. So that was about it as far as the trends that I wanted to cover about what's going on here on the 50% of the world that is contingent instead of FTE HR. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Great insights, and thank you for sharing them. And for our audience, if you have any questions, please ask them in the chat function on your screen. I have a couple of questions, and
please.
You mentioned a couple of trends that you see, like the Great Resignation, which is happening in the US. Mm-hmm. I saw the latest labor statistics yesterday, I think, and also the direct sourcing trend.
Yes.
But as Pro, you work all around the globe. So, what is happening do you think in the US, and how much is it different in maybe here in Europe? Is it the same? Or
it's very interesting. No, go ahead. Please finish the question.
No, what do you see as different trends in the US and in Europe, or maybe there aren't any differences?
I actually see more similarities than I do differences, and we work with very large European companies that operate not just in their specific country, but operate across broader Europe or broader EMEA. And a lot of the European clients we work with operate as globally as our US customers. So from that shift to kind of remote, I need more flexibility, et cetera. If anything, I think we're seeing that more pronounced in Europe than we are in the United States, although it's pronounced in both. The shift from direct source, and by the way, we will, on any given week, we will put workers in place in over 40 different countries just in Europe. Mm-hmm. About 106, and on a global scale, we will put, for a U.S. or European-based company, we will put workers in 106 markets, around the world on a weekly basis. In Europe specifically, for European companies, right, or that are headquartered somewhere, or right there in one country, or U.S. companies that have Europe operations, we'll put workers in 40 different European countries. So whether I'm European-based or U.S.-based, I'm hiring all over the continent, in Europe in a big way. So that's very consistent. The direct sourcing we are seeing every bit as pronounced in Europe as we are in the United States. So that's very, very similar. I would say that the technology adoption is a little bit faster here in North America than it is Europe. Not dramatically so, but in general, I'd say there's probably a year and a half gap there in maturity around the technology adoption. And I think on the regulatory and compliance side, the European issues are probably even more pronounced, right, than they are in Europe. There is no such thing as the United States of Europe, right? and while I would say that I think the people in Texas are as incredibly different than the people in California, there's a lot of diversity, in the States. From a regulation standpoint, it's a little less complex. So I think the whole regulation standpoint and what I have to do around compliance is probably even more pronounced in Europe. So there are definitely some differences, but in general, like I said, way more similarities, and then there are differences.
You talk about the regulations and the new laws. We have seen the AB5 law in California, the IR35 in the UK. We have our
that's right. Yeah.
The DBA, the Dutch law, and they're coming more and more. Do you think that will contain the growth of contingent workforce, or will it go anyhow?
I don't. I don't. And that kind of compliance, and then you got things like GDPR, right, which is not necessarily regulation, but it's around data security, and that certainly hits contingent and employee data every bit as much as consumers. So there's so much of that swirling around. We don't see it containing it. We see it forcing European companies. I'm sorry for having to clear my throat. They're needing to go work with providers or consultants or experts to actually figure out how to do it right. So it can either contain you and shrink you and not let you be competitive, or you as an organization go ahead and invest the money, the time, the resources, the expertise to make sure that you can continue to expand in contingent, but do it in a compliance and a data regulation way. We are seeing investment in doing it right and continue to scale, rather than lack of investment, and seeing it compressed. And I think that's going to continue.
Yeah. It talked about integration of all kinds of services, and one of the viewers asked if RPO will become also a part of the total landscape of solutions.
I think so. I personally think so as an executive in a company, and we as a company, I think the industry, we definitely see that. It's interesting. The world of contingent is so fragmented. That little slide I showed with all the logos, just to make it a visual. We're very much focused on tying the entire world of contingent together. But even as we do, you're going to see the worlds of FTE come together. So whether it's on that services line, RPO and contingent eventually are going to come more and more together. The software layer, right, the VMS systems in the software layer versus the HCM or ATSM systems, they're going to come a little more together. The data, right, the data providers, people like us that do contingent data versus full-time, that's going to come together. You've got PEOs, right, on the full-time payroll side, we're OR on the contingent. As we look at, all of those, is there going to be some convergence? Yes. But I think the bigger thing right now is companies are trying to pull all their contingent together, and then they'll be ready to go into RPO or into HCM or into full-time data or into PEO, right? So step one, step two. But is that a trend that's going to happen? Absolutely.
Yeah. In the direct sourcing, we talked about the direct sourcing, and one of the viewers, and maybe it's a tricky question, but with direct sourcing, there's no need for the agencies. But what is the future of an MSP like Brainnet in a market that everybody sources directly?
Yeah. Well, the MSPs tend to be where the direct sourcing is happening. Right. So if you this is an incredibly simplistic view, but you've got the actual, say, staffing agencies up here, right? They actually are in the job of providing talent. The MSP, right, whether it's the services part of the MSP or the technology part of the MSP, is there in the middle optimizing, right? So it's the MSP's job to say which staffing agency or which service firm or which freelance network or which, right, whatever, the MSP aggregates demand. It does the matching, right? It does the optimization, right, et cetera. So the MSP's job will be alive and well. It's going to say, hey, I can go direct here. It's still going to go through the tech platform. I still need the data. I still need the analytics. And I still need the MSP to do things like curation and I still do the MSP to do things like the worker experience, et cetera. So I think it's more the MSP is no longer going to just be optimizing across the staffing agency. It's going to be doing optimization across staffing versus digital versus direct, et cetera. So we're actually seeing it both from a services standpoint and from a technology standpoint increase the importance of this middle person called the MSP as the hirer tries to optimize this.
Do you see any future for platforms like Upwork to really become huge in finding talent, and should it be part of the talent acquisition program of clients?
We think so. Yeah, we think so. You've got if you want to say the agencies are a big node of the supply chain, the professional services firms are a big node. The direct sourcing, right, is going to become a huge node. And then these digital platforms, right, networks, talent clouds, freelance management systems like a Fiverr and Upwork, they're going to be a big important node of the supply chain to be optimized, right, just like the staffing agency or just like the professional services firm. So we see them as another big chunk of the supply chain that is going to be very important, very relevant. And quite frankly, that's going to feed not just Contingent, it's going to feed Contingent direct sourcing, pools, et cetera. So we view them as an important part of the supply chain. Yes.
Okay. I think that we have at the end of this session. Thank you again, Kevin, for sharing your thoughts, and thank you for all the viewers that have been watching today to your presentation. And well, maybe we'll see you next time live here at the conference.
I hope so. As you know, we've got hundreds of employees there in the Netherlands, thanks to the Brainnet folks joining the family earlier this year, and I can't wait for the COVID restrictions to be lifted so that I can actually get out there, and hopefully we will meet in person soon, and hopefully I'll be lucky enough to meet some of your audience in person in a future trip as well. So we're honored to be in the program, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today.
Okay, more than welcome. Dank u wel, kijkers, voor jullie aanwezigheid. We sluiten hierbij af voor vandaag. Morgen zijn we natuurlijk weer terug op de webinar weekdag met succesvol werven in een krappe arbeidsmarkt. En dan komen we vrijdag weer op een onderwerp wat we net ook aan bod kwam, namelijk Total Talent Acquisition. En hele mooie programma's nog. Wie weet dat ik jullie daar zie. En in ieder geval bedankt voor jullie aanwezigheid en tot ziens.